talking on the provision for SEN in schools. So, one of the important things is understanding what the school can and should be delivering. And there's quite a lot there under the new way that SEN is working. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
Hello. I am really pleased to be here and I'm really pleased to be presenting. However, it came as a little bit of a surprise to me last night that I would be up here presenting this morning because it was going to be Emily Williams-Jones who was going to be speaking. So I have Emily's slides, but I have put in a few little pictures because I just can't help but put a few pictures in terms of everything I do. So you do have the presentation on your table, but it doesn't have the picture of Lilo and Stitch on it, but it does have the red heading and the red bottom section, so you'll be able to identify it that way. So I think I'd probably better start with telling you who I am and why I'm here and what I do and all those sorts of things. My name is Vicky Jarvis and I am Joint Principal Educational Psychologist. So I work closely with my colleague Simon Claridge to manage the Educational Psychology Service across Bristol. We work together to help deliver services to schools and we also work very closely with the SEN department and hence my colleague Emily asking if I would step into her shoes today as she's been called away. So I wanted to start by saying that a lot of us who work within services, within education, are parents, and quite a significant number of us are also carers of young people who have special educational needs and health needs. And I think that's really important for us in terms of what we do. Because most certainly my eldest son, who has significant medical needs, has taught me a lot and has seriously made me reflect upon my work. And that's why I'm really pleased to be able to hear to speak today, because I think it is an amazing gift that my eldest son has given me, to be able to see the world through both an educational professional's eyes and also through the eyes of a parent of a young person with particular needs and difficulties. So why Lilo and Stitch? Well, I hope, does anybody recognise Lilo and Stitch? Am I the only one that's seen the film, or a few of you have? Oh, it's one of my absolute favourites. It's one of the things that Disney got perfectly right for me. So Lilo is a young lady who has social, emotional and mental health needs. She's been recently bereaved and she goes to a dog's home because she needs a pet, and the pet that she gets is actually an alien and not a dog. And anyway, it's this wonderful story about how the relationship between the two develops and progresses. As part of the film, there is this wonderful phrase that I love, and it's called ohana. And ohana means that nobody gets forgotten or left behind. And it basically is a Polynesian or Hawaiian phrase for family. And I've been in lots of meetings like this where we're asked to define what we think inclusion is. And for me, the phrase from Lilo and Stitch and Disney, ohana, everybody's included, nobody gets left behind or forgotten, is so important. And that's what I try and persuade people as I'm involved in various different meetings, that that's what we need to do as an education department, make sure nobody gets left behind or is forgotten. I probably would get into trouble with Disney for using that picture, but there we are. And if you've not seen the film, I do encourage you to look at it. It is a really, really interesting and challenging story. So I've popped in a quick overview of the presentation. So this isn't in your slides, but I've put it in here because I need to be clear about what I was going to be saying today. And I also think that it helps if we've got an idea as we're going through a presentation about what some of the aims and objectives are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are special educational needs, how are they identified, what is special provision, what is the graduated approach, and that's the bit that I'm really going to focus on, because that's one of the things that the code really brought to the front, is the idea that we have to have a graduated response. And it's just trying to unpack that a little bit and sort of explain what that means in the context of working in schools. Oh, joining in. And a little bit about who is responsible and for what. And also, what does SEND look like in schools? Now, I've got a little slot. I've got about 20 minutes, and I could talk about this stuff for 2 days. So I'm going to condense quite a lot into a short space of time. And the slides are really wordy, so I do apologise for that. I like pictures, but we have got quite a lot of words up there. But do take the slides away and have a read through them at your leisure. So, this is one of my slides that I popped in there, and I was trying to explain the Special Needs Code of Practice, which is the guidance that all schools and professionals need to adhere to in terms of meeting the needs of young people. Oh, sorry, can we go back again? Yeah, thank you. We've got the bridge at the top there, and findability, and that's the go-to place for all of us, professionals, parents, carers, for finding information about what's going on in Bristol. The findability site is undergoing some change and progress, and I'm sure that in the next few weeks and months we'll see a sparkly site that has even more facilities information and that we can navigate in an even more successful way. So we've got children at the heart of everything we do, over there on the left. Children and families at the heart of everything we do. On the right side of the slide, we've got the progression there, from childhood through to being an independent adult. And that's one of the things that the code has brought to us that has really helped me and really influenced the work that we've done as psychologists and within the SEN department as well. Always having our eye on that goal of that young people and what level of independence they may well be able to achieve in the future. We've also got a picture down there of our colleagues from the health professions, and we should also include our colleagues from social care as well, because it's very much about working together as a family at work to support families at home. We've also got the picture of the classroom there, and that's supposed to signify this notion about the levels of responsibility, and to make clear that that responsibility for the real knowledge, depth, understanding of our children and young people continues to sit with the class teacher. And the absolute centre point of the approach is about knowing the children really well and being able to deliver really great interventions and opportunities for our young people in school. So, what are special educational needs? And I know that you all in this room know about this and you all have direct experience of it. But we have to adhere to what the law says and to what the Code of Practice says. So we've got the definitions up there from the Code of Practice. And a key point there is if the young person has significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others of the same age, or has a disability. So that's the definitions that we use within Bristol to enable us to do our different pieces of work. If we just pull them all up there, that's it. I'm just going to pick a few out because I do have a temptation when I'm standing here with a microphone to go on for hours. So what I'm trying to do is be really selective and just pick bits out. Either I could go on for hours or I could burst into song, and I want to protect you from me bursting into song. So what we've got here is we've got the various different ways in which special educational needs and disabilities are identified in the classroom. And this is the framework within education that we all need to use. And these aren't in any particular order of importance. However, it is absolutely essential that our teachers have that great in-depth knowledge about our children, really knowing our young people inside out and upside down. One little word that I did sneak into this presentation here as well is on that second line, and this is really important for us as psychologists but also as educational professionals. We need to be gathering information on individuals' progress and their attainment and their behaviour over time. And the key thing for me is this over time notion, because I don't know about you, but my children surprise me and have surprised me since being tiny. I've just got used to where they're at in terms of their level of development, and then they go and do something and they've grown and developed and language has appeared, or they can now tie their own shoes or whatever. So we're constantly having to appraise and update our understanding of children because they're constantly growing, changing and surprising us across this journey. So it's so important that any assessment that we do isn't just a snapshot, it has that inbuilt process where we're reviewing things over time. And that's why the reviews of education health care plans are so important, because we've got to keep up to speed with our young people who keep racing off in different directions. And we've got to make sure that the education interventions that are in place for them are the right ones for them now. And obviously we need to look for those different areas as well. Thank you. Yeah, let's jump in. Let's put them all up there, shall we? Okay. So the notion of special educational provision, there's a whole range, and there are some special provision that is made within mainstream schools, and there are also some very specialist schools that provide a different environment for our young people. So for children aged 2 or more in education and training, it is anything that's additional to or different from what would be available in the typical sort of mainstream classroom. And it's important that we keep that in mind. Okay, let's jump on. Okay, so we generally refer to young people as having special educational needs and disabilities, but in our post-16 settings, the term learning difficulty and disabilities is often used as well. So any kind of intervention and support that goes in at the early stages is referred to as SEN support, and that's the kind of support that happens pre-education healthcare needs assessments. And we also talk about the graduated approach, and this is the thing that I just want to focus on for a few minutes. So I'm really hopeful that everybody's heard of this notion of a graduated response. Give me a wave if you have. Okay, lovely. So some of us have. Give me a wave if you haven't. Okay, so quite a few more haven't. So the graduated response is the approach that all educational settings have to take to understand young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And it's that thing about trying to keep on top of where those needs are and what provisions and interventions are really important for young people. And it's based on this simple cycle: assess, plan, do and review. And I'm really hopeful that you've had experience of going to reviews in educational settings. Give me a wave if you have. Okay. And it's the notion that we constantly need to be thinking and changing our plans as those young people change. So assess, plan, do and review should go through absolutely everything. Can we nip back just 1 second? This little part at the bottom is really important as well, because within education we have a slightly different understanding of the term assessment. So we wouldn't want to do an assessment of a one-off piece of work. It's always assessment to inform an intervention. It's sort of like the so what. So if you do an assessment and find out that the young person has got a low reading age, that's all very well, but so what? It's got to inform an intervention for that young person. So anything that you find out in the assessment has to go through to intervention. But also within education, we think of assessment through intervention. So if your young person has got various different interventions in place for them, actually, when we're gathering data about their progress, what we're doing is we're finding out more assessment information by actually working with that young person. Because sometimes interventions work brilliantly the first time. Sadly, sometimes they don't. We have to try 3, 4, 5 different approaches before we get it right. But it's not that that intervention's failed, it's that we're actually picking up different information about the young person and different information about how they work and how we can best meet their needs. So let's think of assessment as being for intervention and assessment as being through intervention. So here we have a little breakdown of the graduated response. And here we have everything from a young person coming into a classroom right through to those young people who have education health care plans. And if you look down at the bottom, you should see a thread running through. So even if a child is able to just work with quality first teaching, there still should be that assess, plan, do, review process that's going on in the classroom. And equally, if your young person has an education health care plan, the process that we're using as educationists is assess, plan, do, review. So it's that same sort of process that runs through. This looks like it's a continuum. It doesn't have to be like that. Actually, you know, some young people will be fine just sitting within the quality first teaching block, and that will be all that has to happen for them. Whereas some other young people might have to go within and go forwards to have a different intervention. It could be small group work, it could be literacy, it could be numeracy, it could be some social and emotional support. So that notion runs through assess, plan, do, review, and that's what we mean by the graduated response and the graduated approach, that it is the same kind of process but different for different cohorts of young people. Oh, that's my 5-minute warning. I can't believe that already. Okay, let's go. So, if you want to put them all up. What's in your pack then is that's just broken down a little bit further, and you've actually got some more information in there about the different areas. And what I would say is that often when I'm working with parents as a psychologist, or equally when I'm at home and friends phone me up and say, I'm concerned about my child in school. What kind of questions should I be asking? What sorts of things should I do? My response is the same, whether I'm at work or whether I'm responding to a friend. The really important questions to be asking in schools are about, okay, what assessments have taken place for my young person? What assessments may need to happen? What's the plan? Because you very much should be part of that plan, and your young person should be part of that plan as well, in whatever shape or form they can be. They should be included because it's a plan about them, for them, so they very much should be involved in that. Who's going to do the doing? If you want the next one. That would be the third question I would encourage parents and also friends to do. Ask about those planned interventions, and you should also be asking to get a copy of the plan, and you can ask to amend sections of it if you think there are areas that need to be added. And that is both at the school-based stages, but also at the education health care plan stages as well, because the ideas and the notions are the same as you work your way through. And also, when is the review? That's a really important question. And I guess my dream is that when young people get to be really owning their own plans, that they're tapping us on the shoulder and saying, when is my review? Because then we know that we've absolutely got the process of pupil voice and pupil involvement correct. So who's responsible for what? So just looking back through, the principal responsibility and accountability for teaching sits with the class teacher, as it has always done, and not with the SENCO. The SENCO has an overarching responsibility, and it doesn't sit with the learning support department in the school or within the local authority. It very much sits within the classroom. We've got a question over here.
Just a quick one. This is my main thrust of why I came today. What happens if the teachers have no training in special needs and are unable to deliver or even see the situation in front of them?
That's a really good question. I don't know if you heard at the back there. The question was, what happens when the class teacher perhaps doesn't have that level of understanding or the depth of understanding? Well, what I would say is that, again, we need to think about the assess, plan, do, review, and those questions that we can actually ask as parents and carers. So we can go armed with some of those questions to ask. But the teachers aren't by themselves. They do have the SENCO that they can speak to for support in these particular areas. And they do have various outside agencies that they can ask to speak to as well to help develop and grow. But we will have a range of teachers out there within Bristol who have a range of different skills. And they equally need to be kind of networking with their colleagues, and they'll be on a process of continuing professional development as well to help enhance those skills. But we are experts in our own children, and we do need to be taking that information in about their likes, dislikes, skills, abilities.
So do we provide the teachers training, or can they be expected to know how to deal with this in a mainstream setting?
Well, I think
have to provide that training.
I don't think it's a question about you as parents, carers providing the training. It's about standing hand to hand and shoulder to shoulder and working together to be able to do that. But there is a responsibility for the schools to have continued professional development for their teaching staff.
What recourse do we have if they aren't doing that?
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question, and there are those feelings that we often get around, we're bringing information but we don't necessarily feel like it's been acted on. And then I think we do have to go through the various different layers within the school system and the school structures. So there is the SENCO to speak to, there is the head to speak to, there is the Board of Governors to speak to.
My experience has been that the school has used graduated response as an excuse to do nothing, because they refuse to properly assess. What they plan is completely pulled out of the air. They don't do what they're supposed to, and then they turn around and say, well, we haven't got the right assessment for you to go ahead with an EHCP.
And I'm so glad that you raised this point, actually, because part of Assess, Plan, Do, Review doesn't prevent early intervention. So we have to be giving the graduated response time, we have to be giving interventions time and to be reviewing those interventions. But you're right, we need to be able to say and to raise where we don't feel that those particular plans are meeting the needs of our young people. And we do need to go through the schools, through the schools system and through the schools approaches to be able to address those situations. So raising with the SENCO, raising with the head, raising with the chair of governors.
All the parents do nothing.
Okay.
And I think you'll find that's common amongst a lot of us. I had to move my child to school before I got to end of it. It's
Right.
very patchy as to whether or not you have a school that will listen to you and work with you. Bad experience and good experience, but it's certainly not universal.
Thank you. What I'm hearing and what I'm picking up from the room is that that's all very well, having a code of practice and a graduated response, but what do you feel if you're not being listened to and you're not being heard about? And I think I'm also hearing, what is the situation for training for teaching staff in terms of the code of practice and the graduated response?
This is SENCO who needs to be much more proactive. What I find is they are just doing paperwork, nothing more than that.
Okay.
That's a problem.
Okay. So another key message for me to take back then and work with my colleagues through is around perhaps streamlining some of the paperwork systems to free up the SENCOs to be able to do that proactive work.
I'm required for that skill because that is their role to identify what.
Can we just take those?
They are just doing paperwork, nothing more than that.
Can we just take a couple of comments there and then we'll just finish off? So,
Yes. I have got a little slot for questions in a minute. So would you mind?
Can I just say one tiny thing and then I'll...
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let's have these
Two
two.
quick words.
We'll have two quick words. We'll finish the presentation and then we'll open the floor to more questions.
I
Okay?
think this is a great thing to aim for. It's a great idea.
Aspirational.
In practice, in my experience, it's absolutely not happening. And I feel generally that it's statutory. It's statutory. It should not be up to parents to speak to so-and-so, to stand shoulder to shoulder, to go and talk, to do this, to train staff. It's not our job to make the schools do what is their statutory responsibility, and it needs somebody from above, an authority, whatever, I don't know who, but it's not for us to train the schools to make sure they deliver what is statutory.
So I'm not sure if you heard at the back there, but there was a point that was being made about feeling that some of the school's statutory duties in responding to the code of practice aren't being met at this current time, and feeling some understandable frustration frustration perhaps with educational settings who aren't fulfilling and meeting some of the outlines of the areas that the code says that they need to think about. So that's another thing for me to take back. Thank you.
I was just thinking about, it's one thing having your child recognised as something needs, and it's another thing even before that. And I feel that the whole way of getting a statement, is very geared to if the centre of your setting, like being when the child's been placed with a terrible centre, it's a fantastic one, it's huge, but unfortunately the terrible one was before she had a statement. We had to get the statement. In fact, we did all the work and she didn't post it, the person. But what it means is you have to be educated, probably middle class, to get the statement. And actually, if we look around here, it's a ability to be able to do that in the first place. So, and if you're struggling irregularly, say, with the child who has, maybe quite severe difficulties, then it's quite likely that your life isn't very good, or you've done it. So having an education, being able to fill in the form, being able to understand the form, being able to understand how to say the things, to be able to even access the form, it's huge, and I don't think that's reference.
Many parents of disabled children are disabled themselves, and that's We've just had some really important points from the floor down at the front here, and again I'm just going to say them so that we can all hear and share in the discussions. So it's about access to actually being enabled to fill in some of the forms and go through some of the steps and processes, and that is actually taking a significant amount of time for families and isn't necessarily easy. And the other point that was raised as well is around actually some of our young people with disabilities, their parents and carers are disabled themselves, which makes the situation even more difficult to actually work your way through. Okay.
Choose some key slides. I don't know if
I
we can step
think,
through or just open up to
let's go to the next slide, shall we? So this is the idea about SEN support, and SEN support should be in place in your child's setting, whether or not they have a plan. There are some school-based stages of support. Let's just fly through, shall we? They're the different areas that the code summarises needs within. But as we all know, needs interact with each other, and that it's very difficult to pinpoint needs into nice, neat areas.
They're not enough. This is not the presentation.
There are, as I said at the beginning, there's a couple of different slides because what I had to do was sort of turn somebody else's slides into my way of doing things. There are a couple of things that I added in there, so you will find a couple of additions in there, and I'm sorry about that. It's just it's
We can
tricky
send
to
out this.
do.
We will send out this version.
So we've got summarised here some of those key areas of support. Support for yourself, support for young people, and also support for our teaching staff in terms of their professional development as well. So there is advice and direct support from psychologists, I would say that, being a psychologist myself, wouldn't I? And our speech therapist teams, our specialist autism teachers, and our occupational therapists, and our teachers of the deaf. I think we probably just need to whiz towards the end now, and let's have this perhaps as our last slide. So there are quite a significant number of interventions that our teaching staff can put in place in the classroom, and that's before a young person reaches a particular planned stage. And what we always hope for within Bristol is that they're evidence-based and evidence-informed, so that they've been well researched and we know what kind of outcomes a young person should be able to achieve from undertaking those particular interventions. There are the different styles of communication that can be used across classrooms as well, and touch typing and alternative ways of recording that we can use as well. Okay. That's all again within your pack, and it's just a breakdown of different interventions that we can use. And again, please consult those. I won't spend time going through each one. You can read those at your leisure. And the different forms of support that can happen within educational settings, it's been broken down there into the different age ranges from early years right up into support for our young people who are post 16 and who are approaching adulthood. And back to the graduated response there, and that I think is probably a good place for us to finish. So I hope that that's given you sort of a little taste and a little flavour of the kind of work we're doing. And I'm so pleased that you were able to give me those comments, because I can take those back and try and feed them into the kinds of work that I'm doing and the kind of work that we're doing across the city. I think we might have one last question.
Well,
Am I allowed to take one?
yeah, we've got 5 minutes. We can do 5 minutes for questions. That's what I wanted to do.
What happens if you ask the school to get the egg cycling? What happens if you ask the school to get the egg cycling and they refuse, they can't afford it, there's no funding? What happens then? How can they be assessed? How can this work?
Yeah, it is a real challenge, actually. It's a real challenge. And for the
How do parents get past that challenge?
Yeah. For the Educational Psychology Service, we became part of a traded service about 6 years ago. So all our work is commissioned either from the local authority or from particular settings. But it is really important that settings are continuing to put funds into assessments and reports for young people and to enable schools and families to assess and have that kind of information. My advice would be to go back to your setting and have a conversation with them. And if you don't get any joy there, each educational setting has a link psychologist that's attached to the setting, and you can get the details of your link psychologist from your school so that you can have a conversation with them.
Is there any kind of commitment for any child on SEN support to see an educational psychologist?
Any type of commitment in terms of from the local authority?
Before you can write up these plans?
As part of the Educational Healthcare Needs Assessment, educational psychologists do need to do a piece of work to actually be able to submit their psychological
It's
advice.
just that there was a mention about a specialist person coming in to assess at the SEN support stage before the EHCP. Who is that person?
Yeah. Well, schools can actually purchase a range of different specialists to come in and do that piece of work. So they could ask for one of my team to come in and do that piece of work. But as I say, the difficulty for us these days is that every single piece of work is traded, and we have to be able to track a funding stream for that.
So how is this going to work for children on SEN support?
On SEN support, what we do
I'm
find...
prior to that as well. How is it going to work if it's based on what their school are willing to buy in?
Yeah. And
It's a
there
very
is-
unfair system. There should be some kind of commitment so every child has an equal footing and they're properly assessed. Otherwise, this is just a pipe dream.
There is an absolute challenge there, and I do appreciate that. And I think what we've got is we've got the local authority that commissions the psychology service in particular to do various different pieces of work. But it's not an endless pot of gold. So we have to stick with those particular pieces that the local authority have commissioned us to do that are sort of free at the point of delivery for the school. And it is the school's responsibility then, under the code, to actually purchase outside agency support for those other areas.
And what we'd like to do is actually for parent carers to come to us, to the forum, and for us to gather the knowledge that actually particular schools are not doing this. That's the thing that then we can have the local authority feedback on and feedback to that, and that should be a little bit more of enforcement there. But it has to be evidence-based. It has to be evidence-based. If we can gather that evidence, we can do
Because
more.
you're not gathering that evidence doesn't mean it's not happening.
No, absolutely. But in order to do it, in order to make that change, you need the evidence.
There's no parent care voice in South Bristol where I live, so how are those parents...
Come to us, Sally. You know where we are. Tell us what the problem is.
I've mentioned this before, that
Oh,
there's
well, and tell us about the school. That is, and then we have. So if we have several people.
But there's so many more voices
Yeah,
out
no,
there.
exactly. If there's lots of the voices saying we go, there's lots of the voices happening, and that can't be ignored. That's the thing. Sorry, I'm just going to get through a couple of quick questions. I'm sorry, we're going to have to talk later on that one. If I can go to the back. I might get through. We are very pushed for time, I'm afraid, so can you do that?
Yeah, I just want to
say, I have a problem with my school because I've been applying for, we've been at SEN and we keep failing. I've got so much evidence, the centre don't understand that why is keep failing. And now she's telling me that I got bit in for my end.
Okay, so I think if I heard correctly that you've been frustrated because there's been several attempts where you've wanted to put information forward at the school-based stages of the code?
Yes.
Okay, and you felt like actually that hasn't gone anywhere?
Yeah, and now he was on full-time education and now he's gone to part-time timetable.
Right.
School is there, we don't know what else we're doing and who we can do now. So I'm really stressed at what to do next.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I think
Yeah.
having...
And the psychologist person came, he saw me once and he meant to meet me again, but he keep cancelling appointments.
Right, okay. Well, I think that's something. So I'm not entirely sure who the person who came to see you was, but if somebody's constantly, sort of cancelled those appointments with you, you do need to re-engage with them and make sure that that particular piece of work gets into being.
I've been going to him for the last 2 years now,
Yeah,
and it's really,
okay.
I feel that I'm not getting nowhere.
Yeah, yeah,
And school said they don't know what they're doing, and then nothing they can do now.
right.
That's brilliant. We'll talk about that
Yeah,
later
thank
on.
you for raising the point. I think there are going to be lots of really sort of individual sets of circumstances that it would be really difficult for me to comment on without knowing sort of the exact examples of what's been happening where and when. But what I'm doing as we've been having the conversation is there are several key points that I've been clocking and picking up that I will go back and speak with colleagues about. So thank you, it's much appreciated. I think if I just take this last... Oh, sorry. There's a question at the back there.
Sorry, I just want to make a quick point, really. I'm finding I can see it from both ends, both the SENCO and the people working in the schools, and also the parents. And it's a lot of strain on both ends.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that the SENCOs that are trying their best, they're overrun with so many children that have special needs. And it's just one person trying to do everything with lots of very complex needs. But then also parents don't understand because there's so many changes that are going through, and the SENCOs don't really have time to sit down and talk to them, so there needs to be somebody who's like a go-between between the two to be able to explain, to actually help the SENCO but also help the parents as well, like in a way to be able to translate in a practical way to the parents, to be able to help the children, because sometimes yes,
That should be support to parents.
The SENCO service is there for you. Any question, no question is too daft. If you need help to ask those questions,
No question is too silly.
we can go alongside. If we can't go alongside, we can help you prepare. I've got a colleague, Davina, who has appointments available every Tuesday for parents, and she will be working through the summer holidays. Myself or Joe, any concerns you've got and you want specific advice about how you get SEN support in schools, how you make the graduated response work for you, that is what we're there to help you do.
Thank you.
I've had amazing support from supportive parents before, it's much appreciated. And I think it's great that we can speak and you all write down our thoughts and take them somewhere, but there's just a lot of people who don't get to have their voice, and given that they're the people who are probably much more falling by the wayside, or their children are, I think we need a system where something comes from above to train schools, because it cannot just come from us. It has to come from above, it's statutory, and there has to be some system for proper training, proper provision, so that not just us who come along and have our voice, that everybody gets what they deserve. And if schools aren't delivering it, which seems to be a really common theme here, there is some sort of penalty which cannot come from us, it has to come from above, some sort of pressure to make schools do what they're supposed to do.
And to try to reassure you, you might not be reassured by it, but to try to reassure you, there's been a large process of change in the local authority over the past, well, certainly over the past year. The pace of change has been incredibly rapid, and over the last 4 years since the new code came into place, there's been a programme of change and progression. And I think the whole idea of SEND across the schools is being thought about more and more of a school improvement issue as well as an SEND type issue. And there are different pieces of work that are currently underway to try and bring all the systems together so that we can actually start looking at this sort of framework, and actually so that we can have that level of challenge to our settings and say, you know, these interventions weren't good enough, or this needs to be improved, and you need to be thinking about things in this sort of way. So there's work underway to try and address some of those challenges. But it is in this delicious context that we find ourselves in of reduced resources and reduced resourcing as well. So it's trying to find our way through both.
It's very hard to put together the idea of academies and special needs provision and being operating in the same direction. For me personally, I find that very difficult.
That's a piece of work that we will be looking at with other parent-carer forums in the region on academies. So I'm happy to talk to you about that one later on, because there's an entire different set of issues there. But if I just say thank you together, it's SEND strategy, which is exactly the kind of thing that we are asking. Do we need some kind of enforcement? How does the strategy work? How is this enforced? So we'll move on to that. But Vicky, thank you very much indeed for your time and expertise.
And thank you, everybody. Keep asking those challenging questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you want to grab I'm reluctant to do that. If you want to grab a drink, if you want to stop, otherwise we will do the SEND strategy, and I will get the computer up. There is over there. So, about 5 minutes of change over there. Thank you.